It looks like we're live. Hey, I'm Dave Fitzgerald, the author of Playing God, An Evolutionary History of World Religion. I'm going to be here tonight with Jason Foux of Dragons in Genesis, and we're on Skeptic Haven, which starts right now.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.
And we're back. So, yeah, not to be too fumbly, but it looks like it's just you and me, Jason. Are we doing all the talking tonight besides the callings?
I hope so, because I don't feel like hearing anyone else's opinion.
Yeah, apologies, everybody. We're kind of making this up as we go along. Again, my name is Dave Fitzgerald. I'm the author of Playing God, An Evolutionary History of World Religion, and a few other books you may have heard of, called Nailed and Jesus, Mything in Action. Jason, you want to say something about yourself?
So my name's Jason. I am the host of the Dragons in Genesis podcast, a monthly secular Bible study podcast that examines the entirety of the Bible. We skip any verses or chapters. We don't go directly from Adam and Eve to Cain and Abel. We cover all those little boring bits in between because there are little nuggets in there that shed light on something.
Absolutely. The
And
devil is in the
sometimes those
details,
nuggets are pretty cool.
right?
We dive like comparative mythology. Where did these stories come from? So whether you're religious or atheist or something else entirely, maybe there's some aliens out there. If you're interested in the Bible, check out my show. You'll learn something from it.
Fantastic. Well, let's get started tonight. It's a call-in show, so if you have questions for us, please send them to them. They'll pass this along to us. In the meantime, I'd kind of like to get started by talking about Jesus mythicism, which is sort of my thing, and the origins of the Bible, and the origins of all our major world religions. This is the sort of thing that over my nonfiction career for the last 25 years or so, I've been going further and further into mythicism. 25 years of arguing that Jesus didn't exist. But one of the strange side effects of arguing that Jesus didn't exist is having Muslims come up to me, ex-Muslims rather, and say, yeah, we're having the same conversations in our circles on whether Muhammad existed or not. Having Buddhists and ex-Buddhists come up to me and say, yeah, we're having the same conversation in our circles on whether the Buddha existed or not. And so there's always been this little undercurrent of, yeah, this is a lot more widespread than I suspected, to the point where now with Playing God, one of the things I make the argument for is not just that Jesus is a myth, but it seems like every single one of the top 10 religious founder figures of our major world religions are also just as mythological as the rest. And the outliers are the people like Joseph Smith, who we know existed, even though he doesn't claim to be the founder of Mormonism. That's the angel Moroni and the prophet Mormon.
Right.
And they're just as mythical as all the rest. So,
now, did Josephus write about Moroni? I remember reading his works, but I can't remember if Moroni was in there anywhere.
Yeah, I don't. It's a funny thing. He didn't quite make the cut.
Yeah. And maybe those golden tablets was actually supposed to be that copper scroll that they found in Qumran.
That's
that
right,
was like a big treasure map. Maybe that.
And how Indiana Jones is that they had
right
treasure map.
Yeah. That's like really cool. So, I mean, we should have a whole movie based on that. Now, something that I think would interest you is that I've had one of my listeners. I don't know if he's still a listener. This was a couple of years ago, but I used to have this Christian listener who would occasionally send questions, asking about, various topics from my show. And he was uh, the the best way I could put it would be a Christian mythicist. He believed that Jesus, and his belief stemmed from, I think, 1 Corinthians 15, that Jesus was, according to Paul, going to come to earth
Right.
as
Right.
like, the first fruits of the resurrection. And
And
then
honestly,
other people would be resurrected,
right.
and then the kingdom would come, and that this was, still an impending event, as Paul writes.
Yeah.
And so his belief was that Jesus never came to earth, like he hadn't come here yet. And he starts talking about, how in Revelation it talks about the impending arrival of Jesus,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
Jesus is going to come.
Yeah. And he's
Which is weird
constantly
because
saying that.
Revelation never is going to come back. He's coming again. It's
Exactly.
always he's coming eventually.
Exactly.
Soon.
It never any
Uh,
hint that it's a second coming or a return.
yeah, yeah. And
In fact,
so like
he says
he's a
things like,
Christian.
well,
So
hang on a second, Jason. Yeah, that's bizarre, but you know what? It's no more bizarre than the Christians in Corinth that Paul was writing to, who didn't believe there was such thing as resurrection from the dead. It's like,
right.
what are you doing in church at all then? And early
Yeah,
Christian
yeah.
believers, what did they
Yeah.
believe in? Um, uh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
uh,
it's very I just found it interesting that we had Christians who don't believe that Jesus has ever been on earth, at
well,
least
and
not yet.
exactly.
So
And there's the whole thing about Docetism, which the ancient uh, responses to it we get make it sound like there are people who believe that Jesus only came to earth as a spirit, but not in the flesh. But
mhm.
lately, we've been thinking, you know what? This may not be the case. That may be the straw man version that they're saying, and that people were actually saying, "Oh no, Jesus didn't appear in the flesh. Full stop. He didn't appear on earth at all." Um,
Yeah.
it's just like in Second Peter, I think it is. It's one of the New Testament epistles where they say, "Oh, by the way, we're not following just cleverly devised fables. We really saw Jesus," says the forger who's forging, as one of the
Yeah, yeah,
apostles years later. And I think that's very telling as well. Um,
yeah.
but it's interesting. Mark, one of the first passages in Mark, the first gospel, you have Jesus sitting around in Mark 3:11 or 4:11, saying, "Yeah, I tell my teachings in parables. That way, you'll know what I mean because I'll explain it
Mhm.
in private. But if I say it outright, then all those people who aren't in our little club, then they would be saved. They'd turn from their sins and be saved. That makes no sense to what most Christians think of Jesus was here to do, was to save everybody. It makes perfect sense if this
Mm.
Jesus Marks is a mystery faith savior, where you have secret initiations and baptisms and Lord's suppers, but you have to be in the club to take advantage of these great deals. It's not till later that it just becomes,
Yeah.
yeah. Archaeologists did not just find the family caskets of Jesus' family. That's that's an old story for starters, and yeah, that's not a thing. That's not a
Yeah,
thing.
that if it's the same one, though, it could be like Noah's Ark, where they find it every 5 years. The one where they found, the tomb and it had a whole bunch of Jesus' family
Exactly.
was the
I'm sure it's
same
a polyglot.
guy that was
Yeah.
presenting the thing where he found like the bones of Jesus or something like
Sorry,
that.
the
No, it was the
ossuary of
St.
St.
James
James.
ossuary.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
this is a guy who, like, every 5 years, he presents another, insane biblical discovery, and it always turns out to be a fake. It's always a
Yeah.
fraud.
This is the
It's
thing.
all and over
Yeah.
and over again. Like, this dude said that he found my car keys, I'd be dubious.
Yeah.
He always doing that.
Yeah. Somebody, skeptic philosopher, says, "I think you meant Docetism." Docetism. I've heard it pronounced various ways, but yeah, I think we're talking about the same thing. That belief that Jesus didn't come in physical form.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Let's see. I have something that I think you may be interested in. So I just finished writing my 4-part coverage for the Gospel of Mark, and I'll be starting those episodes later on this year. But one of the projects I was doing was to try to go through Mark, like line by line, and identify potential sources for it. Because
Mm,
you have some of the things where okay, he's quoting from Isaiah or Amos or whatever,
yeah,
but then there's all these other things where it looks like did this come from the Iliad or the Odyssey or things like that, and I was finding all sorts of things in there, and what was really fun was going through and just seeing, like, how much of the Gospel of Mark I basically just, like, highlighted as being potentially from some other source.
yeah,
And it got so bad that I would go through page after page before I would find a single section that I had not traced back to be potentially from some older source.
yeah.
Um, and we're
Well,
talking like 80% of the Gospel of Mark. I'm able to show that there's something that either he's quoting from, it looks like he's working from, or it looks surprisingly similar to something we know he had access to,
gotcha,
like material he elsewhere quotes from. So
gotcha.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of
Yeah,
work, but it was a blast.
yeah. Well, it's fascinating too when we think about our four guys or more who wrote the Gospels. All of them were clearly Greek educated. Even
Yeah,
Matthew, who comes from a Jewish background more so than the other, but they all clearly had a Greek upper class education, which means they were swimming in Homer, they were swimming in the Iliad. Um, the ancient world was drenched in that literary tradition.
yeah,
Um, Luke loves to name drop celebrities from the first century and put everybody in that big tent Christianity of his.
yeah.
Um, so it's very funny to see how much of the pagan world manages to find its way in to our gospels.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was, well, what was really interesting was the few passages that I wasn't able to trace back turned out to be, like, really mundane things, like, let's see, where is this? Mark 3, verses 7 to 10. And Jesus
yeah,
withdrew with his disciples from the sea, and a great multitude followed. Basically, it just said, like, it's a transitional scene. He's leaving this place and he's going somewhere else.
yeah,
That's it. Like,
yeah,
and there's 4 or 5 of those,
yeah.
and that's pretty much it. Everything else, every actual scene, um, it it looks like it either came from somewhere else or it really resembles something else,
Gotcha.
including some really weird passages like, well, one that I hadn't found in any Bible commentary where he talks about how, um, for those who blaspheme the Holy Spirit, better that they had never been born.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I had like 5 Bible commentaries and a whole thing that was just on the Gospel of Mark, and no one said anything about that passage, and then
That,
I found it in First Enoch almost verbatim,
ah,
and,
that's
it's like, for those who deny the Lord of spirits, better
gosh.
for them that they had never been born, and
How
I'm like,
funny is that? How
"Oh,
funny is that?
okay, yeah,
Yeah,
First Enoch 90 something." Um,
gotcha.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
and so it was
yeah,
like these things that supposedly came from this radical rabbi
yeah,
seemed commonplace at the time.
yeah.
Like
And you could do the same thing with there's that passage where it says, "Oh, he doesn't teach like the scribes and the Pharisees." Well, no, he teaches exactly. Moses' teachings are being ripped off from the scribes and the Pharisees.
oh yeah, the
And
Pharisees
the
would have loved him.
Pharisees would have loved somebody like Jesus. Absolutely, they hated the temple, those Sadducees. Um, yeah. Um, oh, I had another thought, and we've got too many things jumping around that maybe miss it. But
Yeah,
oh, I know what it was. It was the more we look into Mark and the other Gospels, the more obvious it is that these are literary creations right out of the gate. There's no
yeah,
telephone game. There's no oral tradition behind it all. Um, it's a little snippet here, a little snippet here, something from the Stoics, something from the Pharisees, something from the Cynics. But none of it is, they don't talk, they don't present it, and they don't speak like they are eyewitnesses giving an account or passing on an account from earlier eyewitnesses. It's all literary creations right out of the box.
Right. Now, have you heard the hypothesis that Mark was originally written as a stage production?
I have heard people put forth that. I mean, it's an old idea. It's not a
Yeah.
new idea. And I mean, certainly when you see Paul saying things like, "Now you've seen this performed before your very eyes," so it's like
Yeah.
you've seen this represented before your eyes. That certainly sounds like they're talking about some kind of passion play. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's totally plausible. Totally plausible. I
Yeah.
don't know if it like originated 100% as that, or if a passion play came out of what was written. But to think that there was in a very highly illiterate society that you would have presentations like that of like, yeah, of course, yeah,
Yeah. Like there's a surprising amount of stage direction in the Gospel of Mark, where it's like, Jesus came out and then he walked over here to do this, and you
well,
can
and there's
almost see like an announcer on the side of the stage reading from a script telling you what the action is so these mimes can go and perform it. And then,
right,
like in the garden,
exactly,
like
yeah, I was
this is
gonna
like a
say,
soliloquy. Jesus is sitting there, he's with his, and then
yes,
he comes up and he walks to the other part of the stage. So you turn, you're focused on him while these dudes like fall asleep in the corner. And
yeah,
then he goes back and
yeah,
it's
who's
like
supposed to
it's
have heard
never
this?
to it.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah,
But there's actually
exactly,
a book, I think it's called like The Two Gospels of Mark, like theater and
yeah, yeah,
tradition or something like that, or the two traditions of Mark or something like that.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm not like convinced, but there's a
well,
lot of elements in there that,
exactly.
you know,
Yeah, I mean, I don't dismiss it out of hand because yeah, there's nothing implausible about that at all. It's just when you try to go too far with it and say, "Well, that's where this all came from," that we don't know, and I don't know how
right,
we would
right.
know that.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if like Mark wasn't thinking about a play, and envisioning this thing being performed while writing it, and that's
Yeah,
another possibility.
yeah,
Uh, so yeah, either way, it's really interesting to see how the whole thing um, just came together, all the different multiple layers to the Gospel of Mark. It's an extremely complex
and
piece of
that's the thing.
literature.
It's like that's one thing we need to really keep in mind. We don't have the originals of these writings, so and we know we see this bit's an interpolated. Here's multiple endings of this one of
Yeah,
John and of Mark. Um, and we know like the letters of Paul are mashups of more than one letter, and
yeah,
that's for the genuine letters. There's
yeah.
more forgeries in Paul's name than there are genuine letters.
Right,
Uh,
right.
but and I've said this before, but like if Paul had put one of his letters into a time what do you call it vault, and we just found it, a time capsule, and we just found it right now, we would have no way of knowing it was an original Pauline letter. It would just be
Right.
another weird variant of one of his existing letters we'd know.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's the game we have to play. Is we there's nothing to know, and even devout biblical scholars who are totally on board with who believe it with all their heart, they don't know what the real reading is on some of these early manuscripts either, because we have such a multitude where they're saying, well, one faction said this, another faction said that, and we don't know which, if any of them, was telling the truth about what it originally said.
Right.
It's
And
it's a
I
very
think it's clear that they weren't even trying to preserve anything. They were trying
no,
to present things that would appeal to their particular audience.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
about creating scripture as much as preserving it.
Exactly. And yeah, there was nothing to preserve. They were creating it whole cloth.
Yeah.
I've had this discussion with other people too. It's like it's so weird that like, for the first 100 years of Christianity or so, we don't have a history of the church. We don't have church records. We don't have anything. We have a fake history of the church written by we call him Luke. It wasn't his real name, but uh, the author of Luke and Acts
Yeah.
created that. We don't know why, of all the church leaders they could have talked to, we only have genuine letters from Paul, one guy. And it's been said that if it weren't for Marcion in the 2nd century, we wouldn't even have those, because it doesn't seem like Paul was a big deal during his own life. It was only afterwards that the legend took off. And largely because Marcion liked Paul. And when he wrote his Apostolicon, his New Testament, that's when the what we would call the Orthodox said, "Oh yeah, we should do this too."
Yeah.
Robert Price calls it a theological Sputnik that went up, and that led to the creation of our New Testament.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is there anyone out there who wholeheartedly disagrees with anything or everything that we've been talking about? If so, call in. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Or if you completely agree with this and just want to tell us how awesome we are.
This is also good. This is also acceptable.
Yeah, definitely. Or if you want to talk about something entirely different, like the weather, that's always thrilling and invigorating.
I'm seeing something from Wes here. It says, not the details. I'm trying to remember what you said. Colin, okay, that's somebody else. You were saying you thought you had some evidence that supports something, and skeptic philosopher is saying something about Clement in 95 AD. What part of Clement's letters are you talking about, referring to? Because one thing that's interesting about Clement's letters, he always talks about Jesus. He's always talking about quoting Jesus, but his quotes of Jesus aren't our quotes of Jesus. He's always quoting Old Testament scripture and then saying, as Jesus said, blah, blah, blah. And then he says something from the Old Testament that Jesus never said, Yeah. So that's one of the very weird things in early Christianity that doesn't make sense. If they had a real Jesus to go to, why were they playing games like that? And it's not just Clement, of course. It's the other New Testament epistles as well. Do the same thing. Yeah. They claim to be eyewitnesses. They claim to have hung out with Jesus. But then when they quote him, they're quoting something from the Old Testament as if Jesus.
Yeah. It's strange because the further back we get, the fewer quotes we get from Jesus.
Yes.
You look at the Gospels, which are written long after the time of Jesus. They would have been written by people who likely weren't even alive at the time, who weren't eyewitnesses. They don't claim to be getting the information from anyone who is an eyewitness.
In fact, just the opposite. Luke starts his gospel saying the stories. So many people are writing gospels. I thought it'd be a good idea to see the story's been handed down to our generation.
Right. So then you go back to say the writings of Paul, and Paul is nowhere quoting Jesus. He's this idea comes from here. It comes from here. Everything comes from divine revelation and scripture, meaning books like the Old Testament, Enoch, things like that. It's all coming from things he's read. And so it's why aren't the oldest Christians quoting Jesus?
Exactly. And it's worse than that, because there are times when if he had quoted Jesus, he could cinch his argument. Or why are they even talking about an argument in the first place if Jesus already settled it? Like the whole business with that vision of Peter coming down and saying, look, you can eat this now. It's why did they have to make up that bullshit story if Jesus had already told them that already decades later? It's as much what's not in the Gospels and the New Testament as what's in there that doesn't add up. It doesn't makes us wonder, why would anybody say something like that if there had been a real Jesus?
Yeah. It seems like you had the Jerusalem church, whatever that was, possibly the Qumran community, and then you had people like Paul who were going around talking to the Gentiles and stuff, and they had slight differences. It mainly seemed to argue over things like kosher food and circumcision. But everything else, they seem to have gotten along
more or less. And also, there's John the Baptist's cult. A completely detached, unrelated religion at the time with their own Messiah, John. And we have a writing from the 2nd century called the Clementine recognitions. It's made up by a Christian or perhaps a John the Baptist source, but it's preserving arguments between the Christians and the Baptists saying who was the real Messiah. That's mind blowing to me too, because you never hear Christians talk about that anymore.
Yeah. It's just the further back you go, the harder it is to see the guy.
Exactly.
You
And
have
the
to
more
go to decades
complicated-
after his life to get a clear picture of him, which is
Absolutely.
very weird if he
and
existed.
even what we think of as Christianity and Christian bedrock facts is up for grabs. Things that we just think were always established right from the get-go are not. I mean, we've got hundreds of years, maybe not hundreds of years, but we definitely have decades and decades for the first century and second century of early Christian writers who don't know when Jesus lived, and some of them think he lived 100 years before what we think of as Jesus' time. Some think after. It's like, how do you not know that? And
Right.
and then when you get into like the Nag Hammadi Gospels that were preserved, 300, 400 years later, it's like we don't even recognize that as Christianity. You can barely recognize that as Christianity, and yet it's just Christian monks who were turning these into Christian scriptures. It's like we just have the tip of the iceberg as far as what early Christian literature was, and of that we've shaved off the serial numbers and roped it in and said, oh no, this means this. And when you read it for yourself, it's like, yeah, maybe it means that. Doesn't seem like it means that though. It's so much more wiggier than what we have. It says we have a call.
Oh, nice.
Caller, can you hear us? Hello? Oh,
Hey, can you hear me?
I am. Who's this? Who are we talking to?
This is Skeptic Philosophy. I was making a few comments there in the chat. Figured I'd come on in.
Oh, terrific. And where are you calling from, Skeptic Philosophy?
Calling from Louisiana, man.
Oh, nice. Nice.
What part? I'm from Louisiana.
Yeah, I'm from, I guess, the North Shore.
Okay.
You know where I'm talking about? The North Shore up above New Orleans and all?
Yeah.
The Washington, the Florida Parish is what they call?
Yeah, I'm from Sulphur.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you
We're in
on.
the Bible Belt, in the heat of it, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, we're mentioning the early church, and I just wanted to chime in on that with Clement. Clement's the oldest writings that we have outside of the Gospels that we think are fairly authentic. Except Second Clement it's believed to be pseudepigraphic. It's like 120, and they don't think that those are authentic. But Clement gives a little bit of a taste of kind of the ideal of what happened then in Christianity, and I think Clement's a decent little snapshot of how much like Greek philosophy and Greek ideals were kind of floating into it.
Yeah.
And he uses terms like the phoenix and the rebirth and whatnot, and he's already stealing some of the ideals of the Greeks about rebirth and kind of their symbology and whatnot. It's already going on by 95.
Yeah.
What's interesting about Clement, one of the many things interesting about Clement, is he's the one who tells us that Paul died not in Rome, not beheaded by Nero or whoever, but that he died in Spain. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's our earliest account of Paul's death. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we get the only mention of Clement that we ever get in the Bible, I think, was in Philip or something, which I think is a contested book of Paul. But I don't know that Clement is directly correlated. I'm not at my computer. I'm outside presently, but I think Philip is I believe that's a contested book.
Oh, maybe it's one of the early Christian fathers. What's
that?
It would, and maybe one of the other early Christian fathers makes mention of him, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's only mentioned once or twice in the Bible, and I think it's in Philip. I'm pretty sure, but again, I'm away from my computer. But yeah, he's definitely a character that could have existed. I mean, I think we think Paul died at 64 or 65, I think is where they put him. And then Clement's already kind of seasoned, and he's writing in 95. Is it plausible that they met? It's possible. We don't know. He talks about him as if he knows his letters, but he doesn't quote almost anything of Jesus. But neither does Paul. Paul quotes nothing of Jesus. There's one similarity, I think, in the book of Luke, that is about the Lord's Supper, but it's more of the tradition of taking the communion, so it was something that was known already in the communion practice that was going on in Christianity. It's not, and he even said of himself that he didn't learn it of man, nor was he taught it of man. So it's something that he didn't know any Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. 100% Paul didn't know that at all.
Exactly. Yeah, he repeatedly tells us he didn't get it from anybody else. And again, Clement, when he's quoting Jesus, he's not quoting Jesus. He's quoting the Old Testament. Same thing with the manual, the Didache, an early church manual. Same thing. There's this weird absence of anything that would have come from a Jesus. In it.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this of Clement though, his quotes on the LXX, they're really good. They're really close to the Septuagint. His quotes on that, but I mean that's all he quotes. He doesn't quote anything really of Jesus, and the only thing that he attributes to something that's Scripture, I think he is the one about people being tired and saying that their fathers and mothers were told that the Lord was coming or something like that, and that they've been patient, that they've been waiting. He acts as if this is a quote from a Scripture, but it's not found anywhere. And maybe it's something that's lost. I don't know. But it does look like at times that he might have knew something from Matthew, strangely. I was looking at this about 3 days ago, but it does look like he might have seen something from Matthew or something that Matthew might have taken origin from. I don't know if this is that Q source or whatever it is.
Yeah. See, this is the thing. I don't think there was
I know I ran into this a few days ago.
Yeah. It gets very wiggly when you start talking about Christianity in Clement's time and like how much of our New Testament we had at that point. Because, for instance, he couldn't have quoted anything from Luke because Luke could not have been written before Flavius Josephus wrote his book in 93 or 94 because he steals from it. And so there's this line of dominoes that we get when it comes to the dating game when these things are happening. Somebody had a question.
Might be a little off on the dating, though. I think critical scholars are putting Luke at 80 or 90, which could have put it.
Yeah, that's not true. It's just not possible. It's just not possible. I mean, some of them are up for grabs. Like Matthew could have been that early. But if anything, they're later than that. But they can't be that early. All the wishful thinking from apologists aside, that's just not. It's just a non-starter. And John was later still, of course.
Interesting.
Yeah. Not to interrupt.
There's almost no literature.
Sorry, again, one more time.
I said there's almost no literature that's preserved that we would think authentic. It's something that it does seem like a slow development, and obviously none of it's written in Aramaic originally. We don't.
Absolutely.
And Tertullian and all of the church fathers, they use this term like as it was passed down to us. So what's weird is we talk about autographic text, like the original autographs, but we've never had any church fathers actually ever talk about originals. There's no church father that has ever talked about an original.
Yeah,
so we don't even know that there were such things as originals.
Absolutely. I just want to put a point because I saw a question in passing, or not a question, a statement from Faye, maybe, I don't know, says, we had a biography of Jesus in less than 100 years after his death. No other famous ancient historical person has ever achieved this. This was unheard of. No, it wasn't unheard of. And the thing is now as you talk about historians and biographies that have survived to our time, that's a whole different story. But we had any number of biographies being written, during the time of their lives or shortly after. Don't
right
make
before Jesus, Dionysius, I actually believe.
I was gonna Apollonius of Tyana, any number,
I mean, multiple people who were traveling with Alexander the Great documented his life, and it is their books that are quoted by later authors that are preserving the biographies that we still have today. So these are eyewitness sources that were writing his biographies, and there were multiple. But here's the fun part. We don't have a biography of Jesus. We have scriptures written by people who knew nothing about the man, who were compiling it from earlier literature, not
Yep.
from any biographical sources. They were using things like the Iliad, the Old Testament, the Book of Enoch, the letters of Paul. Jesus
Yep.
repeatedly quotes from the letters of Paul in the Gospel of Mark and other Gospels. There's actually a book I'm reading now that shows how a lot of the Q material that shows up in Matthew and Luke comes
Q.
from the letters of Paul.
Yeah.
Like we have the Q source. It's
See,
Paul's letters. Jesus is quoting Paul.
here's the thing. I think it's
we
even
don't
simpler
have
than that.
biographies of
I think
Jesus.
it's even simpler than that. What we call the Q source is just where Luke is stealing from Matthew and Mark.
Yes.
But yeah, Occam's razor
I
and all
think
that.
there's another document that we don't have. I really
Well,
do.
I mean, I wouldn't say there couldn't have been, but I'm not convinced that they've been able to trace out its shape and its content with such confidence that the way they have. Same thing with John. We've got there's definitely somebody's been padding the books, because there's an original core to it, and then you have this signs gospel that's been inserted into it.
Yeah. John went through iterations. I think that's pretty commonly accepted, that John went through a few different iterations inside of the Johidian group before we got, its final version of where it's at. But do we have any traces of those iterations? I don't think that we do, but yeah, it is believed that it went through iterations.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. And Effie, the biographies we still have that are preserved intact of Alexander the Great came about 400 years later, but they are repeatedly quoting from biographies written by people in his army
Yeah.
during his lifetime.
Yeah, so these aren't even secondhand. These
are quoting the same material verbatim from these same sources. So we
primary
have
sources.
biographies written during his life and immediately thereafter, and those are the sources for the later biographies from 4 centuries later. So and he's
the good point to make with this is in all these other cases, not only do we have historians doing this, not preachers, but we have historians who are telling about their sources, how much faith they put in their sources when they're skeptical about a source. They're going from primary sources. This is not everything in the Gospels is hearsay. It would be, none of it would be admissible in a court of law. But we have, and I love when preachers try to say, well, you're judging the Gospels by our modern standards, as if we're the assholes for being, sticklers for it. But the ancient ones were just as tough on it, and they were just as angry about people forging in other people's names. It's like, no, it wasn't a mark of respect. It wasn't a accepted practice. They condemned it just like we would. And
well, I don't think that actually happened until about 300, though, because pseudepigraphic was super, super common. It's not that it was good or bad. It was just happening like crazy. We got pseudepigraphic of philosophers and everything else.
But it wasn't accepted. Yeah, absolutely. The forgery was rampant, but it was not accepted. And Bart Ehrman's book, Forgery and Counterforgery in Christianity, does such a great job of making the point that early Christianity was noted for the amount of forgery in it, even to non-Christians, but just skeptics. It was remarkably that was its reputation, that Christians were just making stuff up like drunken people going from party to party, they were saying.
So we had a bunch of intertestamental Jewish faith stuff that was doing this as well. I mean, from Enoch to what's the other one that did the angel character that was likened into the serpent, or at least I'm trying to think of the name of it, Jubilee. And we had a lot of kind of intertestamental versions came out.
We could keep going down the list of that, but before we go too far afield, I want to make one point about the Jewish writings. The Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. If you've read anything by Russell Gmerkin's work, He's
Mhm.
demonstrating that we really don't have any evidence for the first 5 books of the Bible, especially the Pentateuch, before the year 273 or 272, or is it 273, 274? That's how much he's pinpointed where this is coming out of from. He makes the argument that the same team that gave us the translation of the scriptures in Alexandria are the same people that created those scriptures in the first place. Which
I think that's getting a little deep in the conspiracy side, and the only reason that I say that is we have atheists and very skeptic biblical scholars that date these.
Yeah, the dating on that.
They date these like the Yahweh source, the priest source. They date these back.
And he's not denying
Genesis was before first Genesis.
Let me put a pin in this for a second. He's not denying that there's different stratas in the Bible, but what he's saying is, yeah, these are coming from different sources, but they're not geological sources. These are taking 2 different sources and combining them into one at the same time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And we used to think, oh, this was written in the time of Moses, whenever that was, 59. Then say, oh, no, it's probably the time of the United Monarchy. Well, maybe there wasn't a United Monarchy. And then say, well, maybe it was during the Babylonian exile. Well, maybe it was the post-exile. And now it looks more and more, it's just been getting closer and closer. And now we think it's landed in the Hellenistic period.
Yeah. Well, another thing is a lot of these different names don't even start appearing until much later.
Hypothesis, and it's easily pulled on Wikipedia how they do the dating. And I think even from the skeptical scholar side, that the documentary hypothesis is highly invested in, and that they do think that there's the Deuteronomy origin, which the Deuteronomy kind of stands by itself, but then you have the Yahweh source, the priestly source, and a few others, and some of them was kind of cut and pasted. Some of that source was used for Genesis. We might have 3 different sources that were used, it's believed to be used for the book of Genesis and so forth. But I think that documentary hypothesis is very well written.
Well, here's the thing. It has enjoyed definitely it's enjoyed primary study for quite some time. But Gmerkin is not the only one who's pointing out problems with the documentary hypothesis. The basic point of it, that we have multiple sources for the Bible, everyone agrees on that. It's obvious, and they agree that that's those lines of demarcation that we call, Yahweh, priestly source. He agrees with those as well. But what is happening is that the dating, again, this is not just Gmerkin, but the dating for these sources is getting further and further moved up. And for instance, let's talk about Moses, the cornerstone of Judaism. There is no evidence outside of the Bible for Moses until the 4th century BCE. And that Moses is not our Moses. That is a Egyptian figure done in a Greek style by a guy named Hecatus of Alberus. If I'm getting his name right, I may be flubbing it.
Hecatus of Abdera.
Abdera, thank you.
Yeah.
That's not our Moses. A generation later, Manetho, a priest in Egypt, writes a story of Moses. That's not our Moses either. Our Moses is somebody writing in reaction to that story by Manetho, a second version of Moses. And it's not only dependent on that story, but it's also responding to it. Everything that's in this Egyptian story that's kind of anti-Jewish, and it makes the argument that everything Jewish was originally Egyptian, and it was an Egyptian colony, and they did all these things, but they were all lepers. All these things you see, these weird little touches in Moses' story come out of that. And we've known about these other versions of Hecataeus and Manetho for ages, but we always thought it was a Greek or an Egyptian reaction to our Moses. And I think Gmerkin is the first one that's really demonstrated that, well, no, because there is no Moses before that.
Yeah, I think the call dropped. But something I was going to add is, you're talking about how there are other scholars who are coming to the same conclusion. One that I would recommend reading is Gad Barnea. He actually has like a whole collection of things written by a variety of different people. that different scholars who are
Yes.
to this same conclusion. And he had this one article that I found on academia.edu that talks all about like the 3rd century, maybe 4th century BCE influences on the Torah, and how
Yeah.
there were a lot of things that they were picking up at that late of a date
Right.
that were
Right.
becoming instrumental in the creation of these stories. And now these stories, many of them could have existed prior and were then
Oh,
modified. That was
and
very
yeah,
common.
there's definitely nuggets and things of older
Executing
things.
is ancient. The
Absolutely. But as
was
far as,
the
but for
Song of
instance,
Deborah, but they
we
weren't
know,
together
we
until much later.
yeah, and I'm sorry to talk over you. We got a bit of a time lag, and that's making things
Yeah,
interesting. But for instance, like we know that the Noah story is taken from the Gilgamesh story,
yeah,
and it's an ancient Mesopotamian thing. But the interesting thing that people like American have pointed out is that our story isn't just based on Mesopotamian mythology; it's based on this particular author's version of Mesopotamian mythology.
right.
Um, and yeah, and again, it keeps coming back to we've known about these guys forever, but we always had it flipped the wrong way.
Yeah.
I want to before we get too much in the weeds, I want to point out another thing called the Elephantine Papyri, and I don't know
Oh,
if
yeah.
our audience is, but what that is it's the Elephantine was a Jewish colony in Egypt, and for 100 years we have a century's worth of their correspondence, their legal documents, um, you name it. We just have this huge archive of material from this Jewish colony in Egypt that survived from the 7th century BCE. And what we found out in there is they have their own temple in Egypt in a time when you're only supposed to have the temple in Jerusalem. So that's bad. Not only is that, they worship a god called Yao, not Yahweh, but Yao, and 4 other gods, including his consort. And they're all Jews. They all say things like, in their letters, I hope may the gods bless you, my brothers, and things like that. They're not some weird mutant spinoff. They're not some land that time forgot Jews out in the middle of Egypt. They're on good terms with the temple in Jerusalem. Their temple in Jerusalem has no problem with them having their own temple or worshiping 5 gods. They go to them for help, and they exchange correspondence. And they defer to the Jerusalem temple. But when they get judgments from the Jerusalem temple, they don't seem to be based on the Torah. They don't seem to be based on Mosaic law. They don't seem to know anything about Moses or Abraham or any of these names that we get from Genesis or Exodus or Leviticus, Numbers, or Deuteronomy. None of that appears in this Judaism. And in fact, there's one mention of Passover, and that's mentioned in a letter from the Persian governor telling the Jews here how to celebrate this new festival called Passover, and here's how you do it. And his instructions aren't quite what we have for our Passover, what we know of it.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is the Passover part of that. Actually, the word Passover is actually like a later thing. One of the earlier interpreters decided that it said Passover, but
Yeah.
the text does not actually say Passover.
Yeah.
It's just this feast that takes place at the correct time to be Passover,
Yeah.
but isn't called Passover.
Right.
Actually, Gad Barnea has this whole big article just about that letter,
Yeah.
and they're like they're getting instructions. So these Jews living in Egypt are getting instructions on how to celebrate this thing that would later be known as Passover.
Right.
The instructions look pretty close to what we have, though there are some
There's
differences.
some interesting disconnects.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But there's no mention of Moses, no mention of the Exodus, no mention
Nope.
of the angel of death, no mention of
Yeah.
any passing over anything else.
Yeah.
It's like they had this festival. The
Yeah.
Passover that we have in Exodus is an ideological tale to explain where that came from,
Thank
so they
you.
can say, "No, it's not Persian.
Yeah.
It's Jewish."
Exactly.
And what's
Exactly.
really
Yeah.
funny though is in those letters, and also in the Torah, when they talk about like in Exodus, they're talking about building the temple, the tabernacle, and you set up the altar of Holocaust where you burn all these offerings and everything else. Gad Barnea points out that the specific word they use for this fire altar is the fire altar of Ahura Mazda from Persia.
Wow.
This is a Zoroastrian practice that's being incorporated into Judaism prior to the writing of Exodus.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Let's talk about Zoroastrianism for a minute.
Yeah,
because
look it up, academia.edu, Gad Barnea. You can find a ton of articles by the man. Amazing stuff. Definitely check that out.
At one point before we go on to Zoroastrianism, yet another scholar whose findings dovetail with what Russell Gamerkin has been saying is Jonathan Adler, this archaeologist in Tel Aviv, who just has electrified Israel by pointing out in his appraisal, his archaeological appraisal, that we have no evidence, physical evidence, for Judaism practices that we think of as core practices before the 2nd century BCE. So more and more, it seems like what we think of as Judaism started to get invented by the Hasmonean dynasty, the dynasty that gave us Herod the Great, when it was an independent Jewish kingdom for that glorious century or so. And more and more, it seems to be, it's like Islam. Islam didn't start the Arab conquests. The Arab conquests resulted in Islam. They needed, once you had an Arab empire, they needed something to unite the people. And that seems to be where our Jewish scriptures came from. That same impulse gave us our Jewish scriptures and our Jewish religion. But let's talk about Zoroastrianism, because this Persian religion, that it's not the oldest religion in the world by far, but it's the oldest direct ancestor, common ancestor of all the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and all the Eastern faiths, the early Brahmanism, which became Hinduism, early Buddhism, which became Buddhism. They were either reacting to or playing off of these early Zoroastrian, these early Persian, Central Eurasian steppe deities. And the things, what they call Proto-Zoroastrianism, the gods of that are the exact same gods you see in the Hindu scriptures, like the Rig Veda. And I mean, same God, same name, same deal. It's the same gods. And that's something that I had not connected up until I started working on playing God. And it's one of those things, those little side effects that just blows my mind in hindsight, that we can trace both all our major world religions today to a certain place and time.
Right.
It's fascinating.
Yeah,
stuff.
there's a ton of Zoroastrian influence on Judaism. And
recognized, non-controversial. Undeniable. Even.
Yeah, and what's funny is it's not just like atheists saying this. Jewish scholars are saying we owe a huge amount to Zoroastrianism. A significant portion of Second Temple Judaism is Persian. And the word Pharisee may actually be almost like a slur against the Persians.
Jesus Tales asks, we have no extant early writings of Zoroastrianism, do we? We do and we don't. The earliest that we have is called the Gathas, and that's the core group that supposedly goes down to Zoroaster himself. But when we look at it, it doesn't look like it's written by a guy named Zoroaster. It looks like it's liturgical materials. And that core quickly gets added on layer and layer and layer and layer over time. And it gets buried underneath all the later scriptures in Zoroastrianism too. And there comes a point where we probably have Christianity, Judaism, and Islam and Zoroastrianism all still existing at the same time and cross-pollinating each other. So it gets messy very quick.
Right. And that actually does come up in a question where he's asking if Zoroastrianism takes its cues from Judaism rather than the other way around. If in some instances, I think it could.
No, because these are older. than
Yeah,
Judaism.
but
Oh,
what I'm
and
saying,
plus,
like,
they're coming
there
out
are
of a
some places where it's possible. The problem, though,
well.
is
Here's the
that
thing, though. Here's the
when we
thing,
see
though.
crossover, they're using Persian words. Like when they
This is
talk
it.
about heaven,
This is
their
yeah.
word for
Paradise.
paradise is
Yeah,
a Persian
exactly.
word. When they talk about
Yeah,
the centerpiece of the temple, this Holocaust altar, they're
yeah.
using the Persian word for the
Yes,
fire altar in the
yes,
center of a temple to Ahura
yeah,
Mazda.
yeah,
Their god uses titles from the god Ahura Mazda.
yeah.
Their Satan, is is called,
Ahriman.
Hasatan, and sometimes even
No,
it even
no,
shows up as Ottoman Hasatan in
no, no, no,
multiple
no,
Jewish
no, no, no.
writings. These are
Oh, in Jewish
Persian
writings.
words
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
using.
Okay, yeah. I was
Yeah,
gonna say in Jewish
so
writings.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
absolutely. But
it's not just that they have similar ideas,
right,
it's that when we see similar ideas, we repeatedly see that they are using Persian
right,
words,
and it's
and they're getting it from there. So
yeah, and it
it
seems that they show up
make the
right
idea.
in the Persian exile. When they're in the Babylonian captivity, when they're under Persian rule, that's when you see these ideas start to come out.
Right,
For
right.
instance, the idea of hell in Christianity, everyone believed in Sheol before that. Before you got this idea of, well, maybe there's a heaven for good people and a hell for bad people, which they got from the Persians. Um,
Mhm.
and it's fascinating to see all the direct borrowings from that. And again, this hasn't been controversial for a long time. This has been well known for well over a century or more.
Yeah.
Um, it's not just atheists saying this by any stretch. Yeah,
Yeah. No, no, when it comes to, Zoroastrian influence on Judaism, the majority
yeah,
of my information actually comes from Jewish scholars.
yeah. I don't doubt it.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, it's yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of Zoroastrian everything was lost, around,
yeah.
when the,
Alexander the Great.
during, not just that, but, like, because some of that stuff still existed, but then the Muslim conquest, like, they were tearing down temples, they're burning writings, they're just obliterating this stuff,
Yeah,
and they did a very good job of it. However, the fingerprints of it are still there. We're
exactly,
seeing,
exactly.
this sort of like evolutionary tree, and we can trace it back. We can
Yeah,
see where this idea came from and how it influenced all the surrounding cultures in similar ways,
yeah.
so we can see the common ancestor.
And there's
Um,
still pockets of it. It's still not
yes,
dead even after
yes,
all this time. Yeah,
right. Yeah, and so, yeah, it's the evidence is there. It's just a bit difficult to see because so much was destroyed.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, the Jewish writings, including at Elephantine,
Yeah,
preserve a lot of this influence.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's fascinating stuff. It looks like it's 5:59. Do we still have time? Do we have any more calls come in? Did we ever get Skeptic Philosophy back online? Wes, we're I feel like Jason and I are kind of flying blind because normally we're just sitting there and the host is calling all the shots and we just are the dancing monkeys for it. But
Yeah.
yeah, we kind of flew into this blind uh, and we're just making up as we go along. I feel like we're at a Jerry Lewis telethon or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
right, right.
yeah, because there's no one going. I don't know if we need to wrap it
Yeah.
up or what. Um,
Uh, there's a
um,
thing that talks about, whether or not hell exists in the New
hmm,
Testament.
yeah,
It's one of those things. It's in development.
yeah, ah,
You know, the idea, it's hard to place that into the Old Testament. They don't really seem to have this idea.
yeah,
But in the intertestamental period, you really see it start to take off in, First Enoch, where they talk about
hmm,
these big fiery pits where they locked up all the watchers. They lock them
interesting,
all up. They bind them in
interesting.
chains, and they're going to be tortured.
Yeah,
And they also are going to take all the spirits of the wicked people and throw them in there. And angels of torment who work for Yahweh are going to go down there and torture them.
oh my
So the
God,
earliest things of like these demons in hell torturing people, they were working directly for Yahweh. They weren't They weren't
Right.
evil. Okay.
Right.
They were good angels. And this is preserved in artwork for several centuries,
And it makes
in early
more
Christianity.
logical sense than our typical thing.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
how come
Why would the
Satan's
bad guys torture the
man
bad
in
guys? Doesn't make
showbiz?
sense.
It makes
Yeah.
no sense. It's like,
Yeah.
what's in it for him? Why is he, God's this deadbeat dad, and yet Satan is 24/7, tempting everything, causing all the
Right.
problems.
Right.
And if he's
And
not, then what do we need him for? Yeah.
Right. And there's the same thing where we sort of get the idea for purgatory, where the souls of the dead, they go into this mountain that has these different caverns. And, the wicked, some of them will get a chance to repent. And if they do, and they accept the Lord of Spirits, they then get to go up into heaven. And the others, then they're going to be thrown into these fiery pits to be tortured by the angels of torment. So it was a thing that was in development, and it gradually grew over time. And within a few hundred years of the start of Christianity, it really starts to take hold. So the
It makes you
idea
wonder.
of hell is sort of there,
Yeah.
but it's
It makes
not
me
our
wonder.
idea of hell.
It makes me wonder how many other things that we think of as just core Christianity was not for hundreds of years, and definitely Nag Hammadi certainly asked that. It's something when you're talking about that, when you read Paul in the New Testament, his genuine epistles, it seems to me, and maybe I'm just reading it wrong, I'd love to get some yay or nay on this, but it seems to me that he's saying that, after we all die, the Christians are going to be raised from the dead, and then comes the judgment day. So if I'm reading him right, he's saying, oh yeah, the pagans and the non-Christian, they don't even get raised. We get raised and then decide who goes to hell and who goes to heaven. It's like, whoa,
Right.
that's pretty hardcore. And yet that seems to be exactly what he's saying.
Yeah, and you can see that. I think in 1 Corinthians 15, where it talks about how I'm sure he mentions it elsewhere as well, but he talks about how what they're expecting, and you'll have in the future the resurrection of Jesus, which is the first fruits of the resurrection.
Yeah.
At the end, the general a more generalized resurrection of the chosen. And then the kingdom of heaven comes, and heaven and earth are destroyed, and everything else happens.
Right.
So yeah, it does kind of read that way. That it's not everybody, and that's kind of what Paul's mission was to get people into the in group.
Right. Who
If
may or
ever
may not make it into
right, then it wouldn't. What would be the point?
Yeah. It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I got to baptize them.
Yeah. Or you have to, your head of your household has to be baptized. It's you see all these points where it's like, oh, women, they'll get saved through childbirth. It's like there's all these inconsistent rules that just get dropped like it's scripture, but it's contradicting what other scripture says.
Right. Yeah. They don't. These questions that should have been answered by Jesus, decades earlier, are still being debated, and people like Paul are having to try to, make an executive decision on the spot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing anybody pulling the hook on us, so maybe we should keep talking. Any other questions in the comments that we've missed here?
Not seeing any just yet.
Karen Butcher asks, "Where's the gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Did Jesus grow up wealthy or poor?" Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a good example of that, this is a symbolic thing that only kings would get. So.
The whole thing, these are stories, that are introduced, not even in Mark. Mark doesn't know anything about the childhood of Jesus or anything. Jesus shows up as just some random prophet who then gets chosen at his baptism. The Spirit descends on him in order to supersede the ministry of John the Baptist.
Yeah. And what happens right after his baptism? He goes for his job training and gets tempted in the wilderness for 40 days.
Right.
It makes no sense on most Christians. It's like, Jesus and John, he knows he's God. He knows he's just slumming it on earth. Mark, whole different thing. It's so funny. He's just an average guy. God says, "I like you. I'm adopting you as my son now." And he he does everything right. He does everything according to out of obeying God's, and because of that, after his death, he becomes Lord.
Right.
He becomes promoted to Lord. But yeah, he's a ordinary, fallible, fuck up human being, just like we are, in the most low rent, most fallible human story of the Gospels that all the other Gospels were based off of. And yet they didn't like the idea that Jesus was just a schlub, like one of us. So as they go on further and further, that Jesus gets better and better, and Matthew likes correcting the mistakes that Mark made about basic Judaism and geography and scripture. So he likes what he sees, but he wants to make it better. Luke likes what he sees, but goes in a completely other direction. John doesn't even try to match the other ones. He takes the bitsy bits and the bits he likes, and he puts it wherever he wants to in the story. And whereas in the other story, Jesus gets crucified because of the temple cleansing, John puts that at the beginning of his story and has him crucified for a completely other reason, for raising Lazarus from the dead, a character who doesn't even show up in the other Gospels at all, unless you count a parable, the name of a guy in a parable in Luke,
He's a fictional guy in a
fictional
parable
character.
Who doesn't come back from the dead, because even that wouldn't convince anyone. But in John, he does come back, and that does convince, it's a classic reversal of expectation. It's bizarre. It's really interesting, though, if you read the Gospels, in chronological order, to see the evolution of the story and to see how they're aware of each other and trying to solve problems.
And where they're either in lockstep with each other or they're completely incompatible. And like no better example of that than the nativity stories in Matthew and Luke. They do not match up at all. Not in tone, not in time, not in the what happens. And yet we've managed to match them together in such a way that, all the kids' Christmas plays have elements from both of these stories.
Yeah, we've invented a third version.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
In one episode entitled "The Order of Things," I managed to figure out a way to harmonize them. Spoiler alert: Bill and Ted are involved. They show up during the whole Luke thing, and they pick him up, and then they bring him back to the time of the Matthew thing. But then when Herod shows up, they're like, "Oh shit!" and they have to and save him. And then eventually he goes back to the time of Luke and gets dropped off again, and he can then continue his story. You have to have a magical phone booth to fix that
little TARDIS action.
And then their reports, that's where we got our Gospels, is the reports of Bill and Ted. So
too funny.
If you're going to say that both Matthew and Luke are valid Gospels, you have to throw in time travel.
Here's the thing: it's like Matthew is this gloomy, scary story about all these dark things happening and political intrigue and evil Herod. Luke is this happy, lucky, yay, happy Jesus. And it's a happy, sunny story with happy people, and whereas Matthew's story, they're fleeing the country and they're fleeing back from Egypt. There's political intrigue and it's just none of the elements match up at all, no matter how you slice it. And you could say the same thing about John the Baptist. John the Baptist in Luke spends more time talking about John the Baptist's nativity than he does about Jesus' nativity. And it's obvious that his story is coming from a Baptist scripture. It was not originally about Jesus. And one of the reasons you can tell is that he's only in there a tiny smidge. And when you take Jesus out of it, the story makes more sense. And I'll give you an example of that too. In his story, Jesus and Mary and Elizabeth are first cousins. John the Baptist's mom and Jesus' mom, they're first cousins. They know each other. They meet while they're pregnant, and John the Baptist fetus John the Baptist recognizes, jumps for joy in the womb for when he meets Jesus. Mary sings a song called the Magnificat, the Song of Mary.
Mhm.
But the Song of Mary is about a woman who can't have a child who God has bestowed a child upon. It's based on the same story of Samuel, prophet's mom, another old
Yeah.
woman. There's Old Testament's lousy with old women who can't have children, but God lets them have children.
Oh yeah.
But that's not Mary's problem. That's her cousin Elizabeth's problem. So it's obvious wherever that song came from. Originally, it was Elizabeth singing it, not Mary.
Right.
And again, you don't have to make very many snips to take Jesus and Mary completely out of it at all. And again, he spends more time on that than he does on Jesus in his own gospel. So it's wild. Just another example. If you didn't read the Gospels and see John and the followers of John and Jesus constantly bumping into each other and having debates about who's the real Messiah, and how from gospel to gospel it can't agree whether they were complete strangers to each other or they were first cousins to each other, or did they even live at the same time as each other. There's just a mishmash of John material put into our Gospels, which raises all these other questions too.
Yeah. So I see we have a question asking why the two different genealogies of Jesus basically converge at Zerubbabel and then diverge thereafter. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, there's actually two names. It's Zerubbabel and another guy that they got from Ezra and Nehemiah, famous Jewish figures probably. And it was one of those things like, we got to include them in here, even though the genealogies don't match up at all because they don't have the same number of generations. They don't have the same names, but for some reason they both have these two famous figures from Jewish history in there, not in the same place. So it's just more example that these guys are making this up.
Yeah. And see, both Matthew and Luke are trying to link Jesus with both Nazareth and Bethlehem because they want him to be a Nazarene, but they also need him to be linked with the house of David. Zerubbabel being the last descendant of David in the Old Testament books. After that, the line of David ends with Zerubbabel. He's like the last one mentioned. So then they just kind of start throwing in names to bridge the gap from this governor appointed by the Persians to rule over, Jerusalem, to get from, to bridge this gap between David and Joseph. So that's why the names are different after Zerubbabel's, because there wasn't anything after him. That's where the line of David ends in those stories. So they've got to do something. So then they just fix it,
And what's funny, there's two things funny about that. One is that there's other verses where Jesus is in the book of Hebrews, Jesus is compared to Melchizedek, who has no genealogy, no mother, no father, no genealogy. We've got two. And the fact that we have two of them and they're not even trying to match up kind of underscores the fact that nobody was setting out to write 4 gospels. All 4 of these guys were setting out to write the one true gospel. And in fact, Luke says much, like, so many people are writing gospels now. I thought I'd write the true one. And then he steals most of his stuff from Matthew and Mark.
Right. And it also demonstrates that early Christians, they felt completely free to just make things up.
Absolutely.
For a variety of purposes.
Absolutely.
Inventing material for the, to pad out the life of Jesus, to impart theological messages, moral messages, whatever. They felt free to just throw stuff like that in there, like the story of or when Jesus draws a line in the sand, and he who is without sin cast the first stone. The persecution of the woman caught in adultery, that wasn't in there originally.
That was like 300, 400 years later. That's
in the gospel.
That first showed up. Yeah, absolutely.
And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't that originally a story about someone else?
Possibly. I mean, I haven't heard that.
I could be mistaken for someone else, but I think it was originally a story about a completely different person. And it got borrowed, and they're like, what if Jesus did something like, I bet he did. and it just got
Exactly.
inserted.
Yeah. It wouldn't be the first time in the Bible that we have somebody's story being lapped onto, onto a more famous person's biography. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And again, these are just the ones that made our cut. There's the Gospel of Peter, which was way more popular than the Gospel of Mark. We are lucky we have the Gospel of Mark, because Matthew and Luke were both trying to replace it with theirs, and it was not a popular gospel compared to things like the Gospel of Peter, which we have three times as many manuscripts during certain periods as we do early Mark manuscripts. Yeah. And
isn't Peter the one with the 50-foot tall talking cross?
Giant Jesus and a talking cross. Yep.
Yeah. Like, how exciting would that have been if that had been in there instead of Mark?
Yeah. A talking cross comes out of the tomb before 500-foot tall Jesus and like 250 feet tall angels, if I remember correctly. Yeah. It's crazy stuff. And our earliest gospel is a fragment in the 2nd century that comes from some other gospel. We don't know anything about it. It's just there's a miracle in there, and it's not in any of our gospels, but it's the oldest one. And we could talk about the dating of our gospels, how that keeps getting pushed later and later into the 2nd century, beginning of 3rd century.
It's fun when you see like a writing and it has like a summary of the gospel story, and you read it and you're like, I don't recognize this.
Jesus ain't said that.
What were you reading? That's really cool. So like I'd like to know like just how many I think the running count is up to like 38 or something.
I was gonna say it's in the 30s for sure. And those are just the ones we know of and have
So it'd be cool if like we could ever find copies of all of them. I know we never will, but that would be incredible to find.
Or even just earlier copies of the epistles and some genuine letters of Paul. And like honestly, how about people who weren't Paul? It's like one dude, that's the only guy you can focus on for the whole first century.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he talks about some of his friends like Apollonius of Tyana. I want some of his books, but he wrote some cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, talking about copycats. Yeah, for sure. Who's copycatting from who?
Yeah. What about like James and John and some of these people that
guys who supposedly
wrote why don't we have their stuff?
Yeah. And instead we get forgeries forged in their names and pulling crap like, oh yes, we saw Jesus and he said something from the Old Testament Jesus never said that has nothing to do with anything. But they don't keep up with the Gospels. Yeah.
It just makes me wonder, like, during like the Jewish Roman War and the Bar Kokhba revolt, how much was lost? Just how much got destroyed during those two periods. So
what about James Tabor, Dr. James Tabor's idea that Jesus' father was a Roman soldier, Jews Abdus of Pantera? I mean, that's another old one. The idea that Jesus was a Roman bastard goes way back. We don't have any better evidence for that being true than we do that Jesus existed in the first place. So I don't know what to tell you there. Yeah, it's kind of a Shroud of Turin sort of a thing. It's like all these things that got piled onto the legend after the fact. It's like worrying if he was crucified on a T or an X or a stake. It's like, we're this fictional character. You tell me.
I see a comment. It said that Mark must have been really popular for Matthew and Luke to both use it so thoroughly.
Well, he was the first.
One. Yeah, it was the only one. It wasn't just it was, for stories of that nature where we have this sort of biographical information of Jesus that or just any gospel of its kind. We don't have any evidence of one prior to that. So it was it wasn't just popular, it was the default. It was the only one. And then they weren't saying, I want to kind of beef this up. I'm going to copy Mark. But I'm going to do it right.
the right way.
You know, because their
Yeah.
communities, their beliefs were different in
Absolutely.
subtle and major ways. And so there's like, okay, this is what Jesus really would have done.
Yeah.
And then yeah.
I was going to say something, but I got distracted because I saw something from FE saying, Alexander the Great's biographies took about 400 years after his death. Well, the ones that survived, we talked about that they're actually based on primary sources, so they did not take 400 years. What was I going to say when you were talking about that? This is the problem. There's so many rabbit holes we can go down to at every single juncture when we have these discussions. And maybe it'll come to me. Something about Paul. Oh, I remember what it was. The other thing about Mark is that he's the first one to write a gospel that we know of, because before he writes that gospel, the way Christians talk about Jesus is very different from the way they talk about him after the gospels are written. Before that, you get the idea that Jesus was up in heaven this whole time, that he was the first emanation of God, that he was an angel, all these things. But you don't get anything about, he lived in Nazareth or in Bethlehem, or he did this in Jerusalem. You don't get any of those kind of details or talking about him that way. Even though now, when pastors preach about Jesus, it's all about, he said this, he did that, he was here, he did that. Nothing like, you don't see anything like that in the time of Paul and the book of Hebrews. In fact, you see just the opposite. They're saying things like, oh no, he was in heaven this whole time. He was our heavenly high priest. And like Melchizedek, he had no father, no mother, no genealogy, but he lived forever. And all these bizarre things that make no sense if we're talking about our Jesus, who of course came later,
Yeah. So I have another one that says, if Jesus was a myth and Mark was first, why would Matthew and Luke copy any of it? How would you respond to that one, Dave?
I mean, you tell me. They liked what they saw, obviously. This was something new that no one had done before. But he said, but he's making some mistakes. I can see totally why Matthew would want to do it, because Matthew's constantly correcting Mark's mistakes. Mark was clearly a Gentile. Clearly, he didn't live in the Holy Land because he doesn't know the geography. He doesn't know basic Judaism 101. The mistakes he makes in his trial transcript, I'm surprised that the other Gospels didn't try harder to fix the mistakes that he makes in that, because they dogpile on each other so fast. I mean, really, there are some mistakes that he does try. Like Matthew says, there was a guard at the door, but they got bought off by Pilate, or whatever. That you see there, it's a later apologetic response to something, to flaws, plot holes in the first story.
Right. And it's true, whether it was a myth or not, Mark was brilliant literature. And this grand allegory, which is the Gospel of Mark, brilliantly encapsulated the message that these people were trying to convey. It was a powerful piece of writing.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you copy it?
We have a good idea of why Mark wrote his gospel. I mean, we call him Mark. He called the anonymous author of the story of Jesus, the Son of God. Is what the real title was, right there in verse 1.
The Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God.
The good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is literally what we're saying. Yeah. Where was I going with that? You were about to say something, and there was a lag.
Yeah, and so these other authors copying this, of course they would. It served a purpose, and they weren't trying to go about, preserving some sort of history or something. They were trying to deliver a theological message. They were trying to spread their theology, spread their gospel. And why wouldn't you copy it?
Right. And also, one of the things that the guy we call Mark, one of his purposes was, he was clearly writing right after the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem in the Roman war. That's why he wrote his book. That's why he wrote his book, is
Yeah.
to explain why God didn't come down and save everything, because he did, but it was a secret, and he did it long ago, 60 years ago or so. And the silly women came out of the tomb and they didn't tell anybody. Oh, and that's why we didn't know about it until just now.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote my book, so you'll know.
Yeah.
Um,
And Jesus is constantly telling, don't say anything about this,
secret.
and that's why we're only just hearing about it now.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Exactly. And he dropping hints like that conference with Jesus to his followers, that look, this is all one big parable, and if you don't understand this parable, how are you going to understand all these other parables?
Right. Yeah.
For him, that he's writing a big old parable about Jesus.
Yeah.
And maybe we know the Gospels, whether there was a real Jesus or not, we know the Gospels are myths about that person.
Yeah.
Robert Price had an interesting thought experiment. He says, we know these are allegories. What if Jesus himself, whose name is very evocative, Jesus saves, very apt, what if he's an allegory for John the Baptist, and all of Christianity is just a spin-off from the Baptist cult? And that's one of those ideas. The first time I heard it, I thought it was ridiculous. And the more I think about it, the more it makes perfect sense. I don't know if that's what happened, but definitely John the Baptist's cult and Jesus's cult were not the same thing for at least 100 years in early Christianity.
Right.
And there's, if I had to put money, I've said this before, if you could only put money on one of them being real, all my money would be on John the Baptist, not Jesus. Not that I think the evidence for John the Baptist is such a lock. It's a little better than Jesus's. It's a little better. But one of those things that's a little better than Jesus is that John shows up in all the Gospels, and excerpts from John's scriptures shows up in Luke's Gospel. And then you get Christian writings in the 2nd century, like Clementine recognitions, that depict debates happening between the Baptists and the Christians, just like in the Gospels, when the followers of John keep bumping into Jesus, and he keeps pointing out their errors and missteps. It's obvious. It's just like Peter and Paul. It's obvious early Christianity was split between Peter's faction and Paul's faction, and all the other factions who they say, oh, those guys aren't even real Christians. Those are fake Christians teaching a false gospel and a false Christ. Don't listen to that.
Luckily, they don't do that anymore, and all the Christians get along.
But it blows my mind that, like, even the stuff that we all agree on, as much as we disagree, they didn't even agree on.
Right.
How many gods?
It started off fragmented.
Yeah, it started off fragmented, and again, just like Judaism, its roots go down deeper into other religions, and not just Judaism, but Homer, Greek. There's Egyptian traces. There's Mesopotamian traces, but stuff that came right from Plato, directly from Plato, informed whoever wrote and compiled the first 5 books of the Bible. And that was a point I wanted to make earlier when we had Skeptic philosophy on the line.
Something that I find really interesting is how the reaction of these people at the destruction of the Jerusalem temple is so similar to their reaction of the destruction of the temple 600 years earlier.
Or after Bar Kokhba's revolt, when everything.
These things happen. It fragments them. The people are scattered, and then they come up with these stories to try to unify them again, to try to gather the scattered flock under one name. And it's okay if we follow all these different things. We're really all just one group again, and they're trying to, as Jacob L. Wright puts it, forge this sort of unified cultural identity in the wake of catastrophe.
And
it's very similar, and you kind of see it spelled out whenever they keep calling Rome Babylon. It's the same thing. The same thing happened to them again. The thing that they promised would never happen again happened again.
And they have to reinterpret and double down. And it's like, well, here's what happens. See, the Messiah wasn't a political Messiah. He's going to kill all the Gentiles. he's a spiritual Messiah. See, yeah, that's the ticket, a spiritual Messiah. And nobody
Yeah.
knew about it until just now when we started preaching
Yeah.
it, you know.
Yeah, and the reason was the same.
And the reason was-
Jerusalem was corrupt. They
Yeah,
did
yeah,
what was
yeah.
unholy in the eyes of God, and so
Yeah.
he utilized a foreign power, gave him a sword, and sent him in like the angel of death. You know,
Yep.
the same way he used
The same way he did with Cyrus the Great and
you know, and
Sennacherib
Nebuchadnezzar,
and all.
go
Yeah.
in and destroy him the same way he did with the Philistines in the book of Judges. You know,
Yeah.
it's just over and over again. How do we justify repeated defeats if we're well, we must not have been following right, so
Yeah.
do it my way and this won't happen again.
Now,
And then when it happens again, another group comes in, well, you did it wrong.
let's follow that, because you bring up a super good point. And if this is rife through the Old Testament, whoever wrote the Old Testament was doing it after the fact, to retroactively Yahwehism into oh no, we've always worked with Yahweh. Oh no, there was only ever just one Yahweh. Oh no, El and Baal had nothing to do with Yahweh, and they were something else completely different. And yet, archaeologically, historically, and textually, everything we know knows that was not the case. Early Judaism / Canaanitism, they were Semites, they were Mesopotamians, they were Canaanites. They were native. They didn't come from the Chaldees. They came from that. They were homegrown. There was no exodus, no conquest. That was where they were. And it wasn't that the Jews kept having amnesia and forgetting all about God and turning to golden calves and turning to the Asherah poles on the high places. That's the way the religion was all along, way up, all the way until they went to Babylonian exile. Yeah. And then the guys who wrote this history retroactively took all these things and turned it into a big sweeping historical epic, and made it seem like Yahweh had been the God right from the get-go. Even though he has, when he meets Moses, he says things like, "Oh, well, in those days I wasn't called Yahweh. No, I was called El Shaddai." The chief Canaanite god.
Yeah. What I really like is he meets Moses and it's like, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they never knew me by the name Yahweh. But then you go back and look at Genesis, and they invoked him by the name Yahweh. Wait, did you not read what that other redactor put in?
Yeah, exactly. Get your stories straight, people.
You got people editing both stories to fix a problem. It's
and there's also the case where Abraham had this funny anecdote that happened to him. But then it also happens to Lot, the exact same, the doublets and the triplets, where this had the same situations, the same stories, but it's happening to different people. And I think
Abraham, his wife in Egypt, and then again in Gerar. Exactly. And then Isaac goes and he does it in Gerar with the same exact king. And why didn't the guy say, dude,
they didn't even change the king's name. Oh my God, even though it's a generation later. And the funny thing is, I think it was Martin Knopf who pointed out that, all the Abraham stories take place over here. All the Lot stories take place over here. All the, and it's like all these different patriarchs are taking place in different parts of the Holy Land. And he made the point, like, you know what? These probably were never part of a single family epic originally. They were local tribes here, just like the stories of the judges are clearly stories of local heroes, defending their own tribe against some outsider or another. And then much later, we get this retroactive thing where they take these old stories and they slap it together and create a new national epic.
These are not novels. They are short story collections. Same thing with the book of Judges. This is not a chronology of the thing. These are a bunch of different folk tales of different people, and they get stitched together, and then they have this little thing inserted in each one, and then they forgot about their thing. He did what was
there's this like 7-point stage, and it's just like a roller coaster, merry-go-round. But then they forget and they go back. He's like, by the numbers, burp, 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 and it repeats again and again and again and again in the exact same way each time.
Yeah, it'd be like taking Grimm's fairy tales and trying to add some chapters here and there, a few paragraphs to try to make it one long continuous narrative. And this happened like it was in chronological order. No, like these are competing stories about where they came from, but they're all being included to encapsulate the origins of all these different. You weren't supposed to read about Abraham and Moses. You had one or you had the other. I mean, look how many different times Abraham engages in some covenant with Yahweh. It's like what, 5 times? It just keeps happening.
And that Melchizedek guy, where is he?
Repeats some of these exact same things.
And their very names evoke older gods and older religions. Melchizedek, my God is Sidek, my God is righteousness. Abraham, Abu Raham. We know there was a tribe of the Bin Raham, the sons of Raham. Who would be the father? Abu Raham, Abraham.
Right.
Mario Liverani's done a great job on tracing those out too. And there's so many really fascinating discoveries that are just coming out within the last 10, 15 years. And the sea change is slowly making its way out of academia into the public consciousness. But it's fascinating to see. The more we look at it, the less it looks anything like the story the Bible is telling us, and the more it looks like this is all paganism, this is all polytheism, and it's dressed up to look like, oh, they had a fall of that. Oh no, they had another with fell off the wagon again. Wah wah. And it's and kings who like eradicated all the paganism. Then there's another king comes along and eradicates all the paganism again, even though it was already supposed to have been eradicated and burned to this altar and stuff. Yeah, it's hilarious.
Or the different ways they try to address different things. Like, why do we have this idol to the serpent god Nehushtan in our temple? Okay, well, this king, he destroyed it because it was evil and was brought in by later pagans. And then they're like, actually, it's a thing that Moses brought us.
Yeah, Moses. Exactly.
And that story in Numbers 22 is fantastic because Yahweh sends a curse at him. And the people who worship Nehushtan, it then overpowers Yahweh's curse. It's like, whoa, what is going on here?
Serpent cults were all over the place. And the fact that the serpent is in Eden is not an accident either. When we were talking about the judges, it made me want to talk about Samson, because Samson is a sun god. He's clearly a sun god, and there's no two ways about it. There's so many hints in his story, including the fact that his femme fatale, Delilah, her name sounds like the name for night, and what's greater enemy
it's
for a
the
sun
sun
god.
god struggling with the moon goddess. They chase each other through the sky. I mean, his name is nearly identical to the sun god Shamash.
Exactly. And his adventures all take place in the sun god territory.
And that's where it comes from. It
exactly.
comes from Shamash, and it's like, oh my god, and he like burns through the ropes, and he uses the fire to scorch their fields and things like that.
Freddie Bling has got a question for us. The Septuagint, the original ancient text and related tomes, where are those? Are you saying the original versions of the Septuagint? Because that was an evolving document as well. But the official story that we've always grown up with is that the Septuagint was a Greek translation of the venerable Hebrew scriptures. What other scholars have been increasingly saying is now, no, it looks like the Hebrew scriptures and the Septuagint came out at around the same time. That's a very short way of putting it. And there's more to the development of the Septuagint as well. I want to give a quick shout out to Russell Gamerkin again, not just because he is the one who traced out all these connections to Plato and to the Moses story, but we actually lost him completely out of the blue.
Yeah, it's about a month ago, right?
About a month ago, completely unexpected. We don't know if it's a hematoma or a heart attack, but we're just devastating. We've lost such an amazing scholar in him, and for what it's worth, fortunately, his latest book which was underscoring more of the connections between Plato and the Pentateuch and early Judaism. Is going to be able to come out. He has a scholarly friend who's going to be coming out.
Oh,
but
fantastic.
yeah, but I'm just devastated about it, and I don't know if I'll ever get over it, because he was the most groundbreaking. Oh, one of the other things he did, I didn't even mention this. He made the connection that everything we think we know about Solomon in the Bible seems to be ripped off from talking about an Assyrian king, Shalmaneser II. And archaeologically, we don't have anything for David and Solomon's kingdoms. Everything we thought we had turned out to be later kingdom, the Omrides. Yeah. Everything that may have to do with David would fit in a shoebox, and none of it is a smoking gun. None of it's uncontrovertible. There's things that might be saying David or might be saying something else, but we don't have. I mean, if there was a kingdom, we would have so much better archaeological evidence for it. What we do is we have evidence for things before then and after then, but that whole period when supposedly Saul and David and Solomon were kings, we don't have anything above the tribal war chief level. And so all that whole soap opera about David, Bathsheba, and all those things, that's just a historical romance novel.
Yeah.
And that's becoming more and more obvious too. Just one of the many things that's going on in behind the scenes in biblical circles that's still waiting to get into the public's consciousness. Do we want to keep going with this? I was going to say, it occurs to me we could also talk about early Islam, because
real quick, I have a funny Russell Gamirkin story.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
That keeps getting referenced in my house constantly. So some years back, I wanted to get his book, Berosus and Genesis. Unfortunately, and he had sent me like a PDF of the thing. But to actually get a hard copy of it, it was quite expensive, like $250 or something like that. It's very difficult to get your hands on for anything, affordable.
Right.
So I one of my listeners said, "Why don't you start a GoFundMe?" And I'm like, no one's gonna buy that for me. So I post the GoFundMe, and I send a message to him, because I had talked with him, briefly about it, and I sent a message to him about, like, if I can ever get my hands on a copy, would he be willing to autograph it for me? He's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." I was like, "Okay, cool." And I go back and I check the GoFundMe, and it's done. Like, it's funded. I'm like, "Oh my God." So I sent him a message. I said, "Hey, my listeners they've pitched in, they've crowdfunded the thing. They're willing to pay for shipping to buy it, ship it to your house, and then pay to have it shipped back to me."
That's awesome.
And he's like, "Oh, that's like really cool." What I didn't know is that at the same time, he's having an email conversation with my girlfriend, who was wanting to buy the book for me for my birthday.
Oh no!
To this email that just says complication.
Oh
and
no!
Then he's like, he just said that it got funded and he wants to buy it.
Oh no!
And so then my girlfriend is like, "Hey, so about that book." And I'm like, "Oh my God!" And then I said, "Babe, like, what do I do? Like, because do I tell my listeners, oh, I'm going to take all this money and spend it on something else?" That. And she's like, "No, look, buy the book. I'll figure out something else for your birthday," which was coming up soon. Like, it was like, I don't know, a month and a half away or something. And she's like, "What am I going to get him? Like, I got the perfect gift for him. And now I got nothing."
Oh no.
So my listeners paid for this book. It got sent over to his house. He autographed it, sent it back to me. And then my girlfriend paid for my recording space that I'm currently in and have recorded like the last 60 episodes in.
Oh,
So
that
the reason
one.
I have
It's a
good
keeper.
lighting and audio quality and everything and a designated recording spot is because of this whole big
That's
snafu that happened with
That's right.
with that book and Russell Gumerican. And so
That's
anytime something happens and like there something goes awry, my girlfriend and I, we just go complications. um, so yeah, he lives
Oh,
on not only through his work but through fun little interactions like that.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That's
So
brilliant.
that's my
Keeping
Russell Americans, and I was
that's
gonna
that's
have
pretty
him
cool.
on my show.
Yeah.
There was had a whole lineup of people I was going to be interviewing this year, and he was one of them. And we were going to be talking about some of these things, and I was going to bring up something that I'd found that I hadn't seen in any of his books, and that's one of the many times that Abraham has a covenant with Yahweh. He's tells him to go and like take these three animals and sacrifice them, not with a knife, but with a sword to cut them
Mm,
in half.
mm,
There's like
mm.
a heifer, a lamb, and a goat, or something like that. A
Yeah.
heifer, a goat, and a ram, I think it
Yeah.
is.
Okay.
And then to take these birds and also kill them and set them off to the sides. And it represents, the birds are meant to, I think, to represent like Israel and Judah. And then the the three animals are the three kingdoms that are going to wage war against
Ah,
Israel and ultimately be defeated, you
ah,
know.
yeah.
And the symbolism of these three animals is the Babylonians, the Persians, and the ram is Alexander the Great.
Ah,
And it's like, so we've got, and there's like, we've got ancient Jewish commentators talking about how this represents Alexander the Great. Now, this could just be them retrojecting it onto this, but I just
but
find it really interesting that you've got this perfect symbolism of
yeah.
Alexander
Yeah.
in this writing that is supposedly almost 4,000 years old,
Right.
versus
Right. Yeah.
much later.
And
And
if it
I
turns
hadn't
out,
really thought about that.
yeah, what a great one more piece of evidence showing that this probably all pro-states Alexander
Right, right.
very
And that
elegantly.
doesn't, and I wanna point out, that doesn't mean that the entirety of the story of Abraham comes from the
Oh
time,
no, 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 no,
following,
no. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the death of Alexander the Great,
Right, right.
or the fall of the Seleucids or
But
anything like that.
but the
But
final
this
product, yeah, for sure.
piece,
Yeah,
the compilation,
yeah.
you
And putting them all together in a single story and in a Jewish context. Yeah,
right.
absolutely. Then we're
These
talking
are
about something
things,
completely
because
different.
you can easily have an old story. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, the Song of Deborah or Exodus
Right,
15.
right,
These are ancient writings,
right.
but they're included in a much later story.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, they're even written in a whole different like dialect.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, absolutely.
when they look at it,
And
it'd be like if I wrote a book and then included a poem from Shakespeare. It's obviously there's a
exactly,
piece in there, this
exactly,
insertion that is
exactly.
older. Uh,
You could talk about Goliath. The description of Goliath is not the description of a Philistine warrior. It's the description of a Greek hoplite, and his armor and his equipment is all
yeah,
something from a mercenary that came, the Greek
yeah,
mercenaries that came way, way after this story is supposed to be taking
yeah.
place.
And
Uh,
something I was reading, talked about how, it keeps talking about, like, the length of the spear, the spear shaft was as long as, like, a weaver's beam,
yeah,
and it's like, well, like, come on, some of these little things for, these beams were
yeah,
only, like, a couple of feet long, like, it
yeah,
depended on what they were weaving and,
yeah.
the size of, so, what does that even mean? And someone pointed out that if you go back to the Iliad and they're describing these spears, one of the spears that was being used at the time, you had this cord that was wrapped around the thing and you
Like a
would hang
harpoon.
on to it. And whenever
Yeah,
you would throw it, when you would hurl this javelin, it would
yeah.
pull and unravel the cord and make it spin and give it better stability.
Ah,
But the Jews didn't know about those. So when they
yeah,
were reading these descriptions in Homer about this thing with this cord wrapped around, they're like, "Oh, is he talking about like a weaver's beam? I guess." And so they
yeah,
throw that in there.
yeah.
And then the whole thing where, oh, you've got these two armies, they're about to fight, and then the two champions come.
Oh, yeah. That's
That
right out of
doesn't happen.
That
Like
doesn't
that has
happen,
never happened.
except in
You know,
Greek myths. That's when that
yes, this
happens.
is
Yeah,
Homer. It happens constantly.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, for me, just as an ex-Southern Baptist kid, just realizing that there's all these influences that have nothing to do with Judaism in our Judaic Bibles. That there's Greek stuff, Egyptian stuff, Babylonian stuff, Persian stuff. It's just wild to see how much goes into any single religion and how those roots go back to older religions and their roots go back to older religions. And they've got, descendants, it's this huge Darwinian jungle of evolution. And just watching the way the whole thing comes together and how it's related to each other. It's endlessly fascinating to me. Just endlessly. Yeah.
Yeah. It would be like if every year on Black Friday, your parents make these wonderful Black Friday sandwiches with all of this amazing stuff. And then one day as an adult, you go with them to grandma's house and you see the big Thanksgiving spread and you realize that the greatest meal of the year is actually leftovers of like 8 different dishes. Oh, I've got the turkey, I've got the ham, I've got the potato salad, I've got the stuffing, I've got it's all these different components that have gradually come together.
Yes.
And once you understand that, you understand the origins of these stories and you understand the historical and social context, then they start to make sense why they came together,
Exactly.
and how and when. And you say, oh, and then you realize, okay, this isn't like a crappy history. This is beautiful literature.
Exactly.
And these people, this was therapy for them. Like their lives have been ruined. They're living in exile. People were trying to kill them, everything else. And these stories gave them hope for a brighter future, for something that wasn't absolute misery.
Right.
And once you realize that, then the stories start to make sense.
Yeah.
Not as history.
Not as history.
But as as something, it gives you a glimpse into the minds of these people.
Right.
You
It's
understand.
a very human connection, and that's what's given it its power throughout the centuries. Whether we're talking about Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Zoroastrianism, you see the what drives the need to create this. And going back to my book, Playing God, you see that throughout human history, even taking all our major world religions today out of the picture and going back thousands of years before that, you still see these impulses that lead to creation of the idea of a God, and how that idea of what a God is or who God is or what God is changes and evolves right arm in arm with what your society is and how big it is and how inclusive it is.
I mean, like look at the Epic of Gilgamesh. This isn't about some king of Uruk. This is about the human struggle to accept death. You're going to die. But how do I do something so that my memory lives on? That's the whole point of the story. How do of course, it's made up of a bunch of different tales that were all cobbled together, just like the Bible. The tale of Utnapishtim had nothing to do with Gilgamesh. It's thrown in there and it's repurposed. It's he's going to go there and find out from Utnapishtim how to live forever.
Yeah.
That wasn't part of the Utnapishtim story.
Yep.
It became part of the story. Like all of it. It was all these different tales about all these different things, and they all get cobbled together to just answer, how do I deal with the fact that I'm going to die? And that's what it's about. And that's what you find
human truth. And that's the thing. That's where the truth and the power comes into these things. Not because they're true, but they're true in the same way that Winnie the Pooh is true. They're true in the same way that the Lord of the Rings is true. They're true in the same way that Superman comics are real. Is that they're talking about truths in a fictitious fantasy work of imagination. And when we when we recognize that their truth comes out of that, we're good. When we try to say, no, there really was an Aesop's fable, there were a hare and a tortoise, and if you don't believe that, you must be smited, unbeliver. It's when we confuse the truth of fiction with the truth of fantasy.
It's a glimpse into the minds of people, and these weren't like primitive goat herders. Okay, No, no. These were all very
they weren't just primitive goat herders. Yeah, the people who wrote these stories. Yeah,
these are very educated people who wrote these stories. Okay, and they were trying to deal with extremely difficult circumstances. How do we explain these terrible things in light of this theology? How do we come together? How do we save ourselves from, basically just being scattered? And this is their response, their reaction.
There's interesting because as God evolves to the different stages, like in some earlier stages, there's no problem with evil because their gods aren't all powerful. They're just bigger than we are. It's when you said, "Oh, God is omni this and omni that." Well, then where does evil come from? You see that apologetics has to keep evolving too to make, because they paint themselves in a corner, and it's like, oh yeah, why is Satan so much stronger than God? Why is this? Why is that?
And like at one point,
this theological dance around and make these assertions for which there's no proof at all because it's all made up.
Or like you find in Isaiah 45:7, where Yahweh is the source of all evil. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, Yahweh, do all these things. And that was another step along the thing.
That was directly in response to Zoroastrianism, who had a good God and an evil God. And you had to pick whose side you were going to be on and make sure that you pick the right side. But that's exactly a response to Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, they're
check the private chat.
These things.
What do we got? I see it.
We are done.
We're done. Oh my goodness.
It's 2 hours. We finally made it. I was worried.
Sorry if we missed some questions. Well, I guess we'll have to do it again or call back or shoot us an email. We could talk about all this stuff all night. And thanks to everybody who showed up and all the callers. And I guess it has been 2 hours. So this is a pretty good time to wrap it up. Thanks to Skeptic Haven for having us. Thanks to you, Jason, for coming. Tell the folks where you're from, Dragons and Genesis.
Yeah, so if you want to learn about the Bible, get sort of like a crash course on it to kind of begin your journey, head over to dragonsandgenesis.com. You can find me on YouTube or go to any podcast app, search Dragons in Genesis, and look for the big orange logo with the silhouette of Godzilla attacking Jerusalem. That's me. I'm easy to find. If you have questions, find me on Facebook. Just search Dragons in Genesis. Send me a message. I respond to all of them.
Gotcha. For my part, you can find me on Facebook, easiest of all, to Dave FItzgerald. You can shoot me an email at everybodylovesdave@gmail.com. Or you can get a hold of folks at Skeptic Haven, and they can always find us too. If we didn't get to
that's where you send the hate mail.
Yeah, that's where you send the hate mail. Yeah, send it all to them. That's right. But again, thanks for everyone who showed up then. And if we didn't get your call or your question, please feel free to send it to us, and we'll do our best to answer it. And thanks again to all the good folks at Skeptic Haven. I guess we'll wrap it up there. Good night, all. Take care.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.
Woo, we did it.
That was fun.